A woman gets sucked into a jet engine. This is an update report from the NTSB after almost 2 years on taking off. Hi, I'm Dan Milliken, and almost 2 years ago, we reported on the horrible story of a ground crew member who was sucked into an American Airlines E-175 jet engine and killed while the plane was at the gate in Montgomery, Alabama. Well, 2 days ago, the NTSB released the docket on the case with some interesting and tragic new details. And before we talk about some very revealing information in the docket, there's a couple of huge surprises in there. Let's do a quick rundown of what happened the fateful New Year's Eve day, December 31st, 2022. Courtney Edwards, a 34-year-old ground crew worker and mother of 3, was working at the Montgomery Regional Airport as a ramp agent for Piedmont Airlines, a subsidiary of American Airlines. After an Embraer 175 plane operated by Envoy Air landed with 63 passengers on board, Courtney was fatally injured when she was pulled into the left, or number 1, engine that was still running. The preliminary NTSB report indicated that the aircraft's auxiliary power unit was inoperative, leading the flight crew to keep the engines running after the required cool-down period after landing. And this isn't unusual in the industry. There's a document called the Minimum Equipment List, or MEL, that each plane has to have to be able to operate with passenger service. If a flight crew gets on the airplane and something isn't working, they consult the MEL to see if they can still fly. Some items might require the aircraft to stay on the ground until it's repaired. Others might have a time limit, a certain number of days that the aircraft can fly with the item inoperable. And that's what it was for the auxiliary power unit. The aircraft can still be operated for a certain number of days before it has to be repaired, and this plane was within that time frame. The ground crew at Montgomery was notified that the plane would be coming in with the APU inoperable and that the left engine would still be running. And there were safety briefings for the ground crew, including one 10 minutes before the plane arrived at the gate. And here's what the crew chief testified. Everyone working on the ramp assembled for our safety meeting 10 minutes before the aircraft arrived. While we waited, I held another huddle and reiterated that this plane needed an air start and that the engines would remain running until we had ground power connected. I told them to wait for the engines to be turned off and spooled down, and that the warning beacons had to be off as well before anyone could set cones or approach the aircraft. Everyone acknowledged this, and Courtney was standing beside me during this briefing. One ramp worker went to wing walk the right side, and Courtney wing walked the left side. The crew chief chalked the nose gear, disconnected the steering, and then turned to guide the jet bridge over as it had to be in position to connect the ground power to the plane. The crew chief noticed another ramp worker approaching the forward cargo bay, and he waved him away. And then he saw Courtney place the safety cone at the tail, and he yelled and waved for her to get back, and we'll get to what happened next in a moment. For those who don't know, the Embraer E-175 is technically a 170-200LR and is a regional jet belonging to the popular Embraer E-Jet family, designed for efficient and comfortable short to medium haul flights. Typically sits between 70 to 78 passengers, depending on the airline's configuration. The LR designation indicates it's a long-range capability, allowing it to cover distances up to approximately 2,200 nautical miles or 4,000 kilometers. The aircraft is powered by 2 General Electric CF34 8E engines, which claim to deliver both performance and fuel efficiency. Each engine is capable of 13,420 horsepower, which is enough to keep a loaded aircraft climbing if one engine was out. Even at idle, the engines suck in an incredible volume of air and can pull water off the concrete in front of it. With a cruise speed of around 514 miles per hour, the Embraer E-175 is a favored choice and Christie's favorite plane for airlines operating regional routes due to its versatility and cost effectiveness. So, why would an aircraft need to keep its engines running when the auxiliary power unit is inoperative? Well, the APU is a small turbine engine that generates electricity and compressed air, which is used to power various aircraft systems. If the APU is inoperative, the engines must remain running to generate the necessary electrical power and air pressure to keep these systems functioning. This ensures that the aircraft remains operational and safe while on the ground, especially if external ground power or air sources are unavailable or insufficient. With an inoperable APU, the aircraft will use one of the engines to provide power until they can be hooked up to external power, and then the engine can be shut down. Okay, so what happened after the chief waved Courtney away as she was placing a cone by the tail? Well, security footage from the day of the accident shows the ground crew as they service the aircraft, including the pre-arrival safety huddle. And here's a breakdown of the security video. At 3:35 p.m. and 14 seconds, the aircraft was visible in a landing rollout in the distance. 4 ground crew members wearing safety vests were visible having a discussion on the ramp. At 3:37 and 38 seconds, the aircraft was visible taxiing on the ramp towards the gate. At 1 minute later, the aircraft stopped at the gate and the ground crew chief installed chocks on the nose landing gear. The aircraft's beacon, which indicates one or more of the engines are operating, was flashing, that's below and above the plane, and remained flashing throughout the accident. At 3:39 and 1 second, Courtney was visible carrying a traffic cone to the tail of the aircraft. As she walked towards the tail of the aircraft, she stumbled from the jet blast of the still operating number 1 engine. After witnessing Courtney stumbling, the right wing walker motioned her with their left hand to move away from the aircraft, and the jet bridge began maneuvering towards the forward entry door. At 3:39, 44 seconds, Courtney's legs and feet were visible walking towards the aircraft fuselage parallel to the leading edge of the left wing just outboard of number 1 engine. So she's just in front of the wing and the engine. Her upper body was not visible due to the jet bridge obstructing the view. And at 3:39, 45 seconds, the co-pilot's sliding cockpit window opened. The aircraft's beacon was still flashing. 3:39, 46, 1 second later, Courtney's legs were just forward of the number 1 engine on the outboard side. She continued to walk parallel to the leading edge of the wing towards the fuselage. 1 second later, Courtney appeared to stop in front of the number 1 engine and turned to the left, facing the camera. Next, her left leg stepped backwards toward the operating number 1 engine. As Ms. Edwards' left foot contacted the ground, her right leg became airborne and lifted upwards into the engine inlet. Immediately thereafter, Courtney's left leg was also lifted off the ground and into the engine inlet. At 3:39, 50 seconds, smoke was visible emanating from the rear of the number 1 engine. A large mass then fell from the inlet of the number 1 engine onto the ramp. So back out the front of the engine, not through the engine. She came out the front. At 3:46 and 11 seconds, an ambulance arrived on scene. Additional emergency vehicles arrived shortly thereafter. Looking at the CVR transcript, because of the short flight, the whole flight was recorded. As the flight crew taxied in, they made reference to wondering if the ground crew would try and open doors with the engines on. And at 3:38 and 15 seconds, the crew shut down number 2 engine. 3:59 and 11 seconds, the captain made an announcement to the cabin for everyone to remain seated with their seat belts fastened until they could turn off the left engine. A few seconds after he finished the announcement at 3:59 p.m., 45 seconds, the CVR recorded the sound of a thump and a rattling noise and the sound of the engine spooling down. The first officer asked, "What was that? Did someone just go through the engine?" A tragedy for her family and her 3 children, and I can't imagine what those who witnessed this horrible accident must go through. As I went through the NTSB docket, there's 2 very surprising discoveries in it. First, the NTSB report states that a contributing factor to this accident was cognitive impairment. This can take many forms, but according to the report, Courtney suffered from multiple sclerosis. MS is a chronic condition that affects the central nervous system, which includes the brain and the spinal cord. It occurs when the immune system mistakenly attacks the protective covering of nerve fibers. It's called myelin, and it causes inflammation and damage. And this disrupts the normal flow of electrical signals along those nerves, leading to a wide range of symptoms that can vary from person to person. Common symptoms include fatigue, muscle weaknesses, numbness, vision problems, and difficulty with balance and coordination. The toxicology report did indicate the presence of delta-9 THC, the psychoactive chemical found in marijuana. THC affects everyone differently, and some are affected greatly by small amounts, while others aren't affected until a larger dose is administered. According to the toxicologist, acute impairing effects of delta-9 THC typically last at least 1 to 2 hours after use, with a return to baseline within maybe 3 to 7 hours, although some residual effects may persist longer. Marijuana extract, and THC in cannabis is a Schedule I controlled substance in Alabama. The toxicologist could not determine if the amount found in Courtney's blood and urine was enough to cause impairment, but it was a possibility. Courtney also had 2 employee corrective action forms. One was on her performance on the ramp, and the supervisor wrote, "If she does not improve, I will have no choice but to terminate her because I cannot risk her hurting herself, others, and damaging an aircraft or equipment." Courtney signed this form, and this was almost 1 year prior. 4 months before the incident, she was also cited for appearance. She refused to sign this one. So that was the first of the big news, was her cognitive impairment, her MS, and the use of marijuana. Now, the other big news, and this one floors me as well. The ground crew, including Courtney, is not considered safety-sensitive employees and therefore not subject to drug testing under the Department of Transportation's drug testing regulations. The DOT doesn't think a ramp worker's job is safety-sensitive, and this blows my mind. And I hope it gets changed. Now, Piedmont, the operator for the American Airlines flight and Courtney's employer, has a very detailed drug policy and does mention that workers are subject to drug testing, one of which they test for is marijuana. There was nothing in the docket showing that Courtney had ever been drug tested. The report states as its conclusion that the accident ramp agent's behavior at the time of the accident demonstrated that her judgment was deficient. Given her identified medical and toxicological cognitive risk factors, the ramp agent's deficient judgment was likely due to cognitive impairment. The extent to which individual cognitive risk factors, such as the ramp agent's multiple sclerosis and cannabis use, contributed to this impairment could not be determined based on the available evidence. An interesting note, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, released its own findings back in June of 2023, and they fined Piedmont for failing to have proper training and enforcement of safety procedures. The fine was a minimal amount, only $15,625, which Piedmont actually appealed. At the end of the day, the NTSB is saying cognitive impairment. That's the decline of abilities like memory, attention, concentration, language, perception, judgment, learning, and spatial skills. The problem here is that if you are experiencing cognitive impairment, would you even know you're experiencing cognitive impairment? It's a difficult one to self-police. What can we take away from this accident? How can we become better pilots, better people, and stay safer around aircraft? Well, we have to stay vigilant. We have to fight complacency. We can't allow ourselves to fall into complacency. Airplanes are dangerous, and whether they have a propeller or a jet engine, they're dangerous. And keeping clear of these areas while on the ground is crucial to safety. And I get it. It's easy to fall prey to complacency. We're all guilty of it. We do the same thing over and over again, and it just becomes routine. But let this be a reminder to me, to you, to stay vigilant and to question yourself when in a safety situation. Am I on any over-the-counter medications or prescription drugs that might affect my judgment or abilities? And if you're struggling with illegal drug use, please get to help. And talking about complacency, here's our report on the photographer who backed into the propeller of a skydiving plane recently. Thank you for watching, and thanks to our sponsors. Links below in the description, like flyingeyesoptics.com. Use our code TAKINGOFF for 10% off. Take care. Remember, superior judgment trumps superior skills. Stay safe.